what I can talk about other than something that was like really heavy, Bible text, which is what we did the other evening. And so I said I can talk about archaeology, I can talk about modern art, Israeli art. He said, okay, what about archaeology and Israeli art? So didn't really even, it worked. I had something to write about it. I had something to say. Okay, well, you'll tell me if you think so. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. With Napoleon's conquest in the Middle East, there's this growing European interest in the region that's being referred to as the exotic East, the cradle of civilization, the lands of the Bible. And with this growing interest, there's this growth of expeditions and explorers and diplomats and adventurers who begin to rediscover the ancient lands, to test scientific theories in biblical archaeology, and to locate places mentioned in the Bible, and to satisfy their curiosity and their love for adventure. Names such as Woolley and Breasted and Warren and Robinson and Starkey and Petrie and Albright, Quibel and Mariette, not to mention Napoleon, will fill the literature. And artifacts and monuments from sites such as Ur and Nineveh and Jerusalem and Samaria and Luxor and Persepolis and Saqqara will fill major museum galleries and will adorn many a city piazza. Boris Schatz was familiar with these impressive and monumental objects that had been removed or looted. No wonder then that when he opens the Bezalel School of Art and Crafts in Jerusalem in 1906, as a fulfillment of all the Zionist, as a fulfillment of the agenda of all the Zionist congresses, Egyptian, Assyrian, and Mesopotamian artistic styles will serve as new models for the new Jew, the new Hebrew, and for the new Moses, that is Herzl, who will lead the diaspora Jew to the promised land. Okay. As you see on your left, you see the famous photograph of Herzl when he was in Basel, taken by Boris Schatz. On the right-hand side is at the time it was a recently recovered a relief of Tilgat-Pileser III that was found in Nineveh. By the way, Tilgat-Pileser was the Assyrian leader who took the 10 tribes, part of the 10 tribes into exile in 734 BCE. And the middle is an illumination of a Bible by Lillian, who was a very important staff member of the Bezalel School. And of course, this resemblance is obvious. Typical of the Bezalel style is its eclectic nature, both in terms of its use of different mediums, whether it's textiles, wooden, paint, metal, ivory, sometimes all used together in one object, and also a use of different styles, Art Deco, Romantic, Oriental, Renaissance, often also combined together. An example of this is this cartoon in the form of a triptych for a carpet entitled Allegorical Wedding. This was commissioned in honor of Sir Wolfson's 25th silver anniversary. So Sir Wolfson succeeded Herzl as the president of the World Jewish Congress. And although here we only have one medium, we have textile, we do have a number of different styles. By the way, this was never finished. This is just the cartoon. The actual carpet was never finished. On the right side, bent over, we have a broken Jeremiah inspired by Michelangelo's Jeremiah in the Sistine Chapel. Let's see how I can do this. Let's see if it works. See? On the right side, on the right side, we have redemption being trumpeted. On the other side is redemption being trumpeted. In the center panel, we have depicted the proud and regal bride and groom, representing Zionism and the people of Israel, respectively. Both are dressed in Near Eastern garb, and holding up the chuppah are four figures in Egyptian garb, but rather Greek or classical positions. The floral decoration on the bottom is Art Deco. The groom, notice, is represented as a combination of Herzl, and some say even Sir Wolfson himself, and as I mentioned before, also Tilgat-Pileser III, and you can also see other similarities from the reliefs on the bottom. The use of Near Eastern archaeological models archaeological models, was an important component in the images used in the early years of the Bezalel school, because they anchored the Jewish people with the Bible lands in the broad sense. Also because they are heroic and regal looking, in contrast to the typically depicted bent, broken old diaspora Jew. In addition, their images were meant to make that connection between the glorious, heroic, ancient period of Jewish sovereignty with the present rebirth and redemption, now made possible by the Zionist movement. The works of the Bezalel school in general were meant to evoke a boundless enthusiasm and messianic nationalistic fervor that was put into practice of the Zionist enterprise. By 1919, a new kind of zeal will be depicted by the rebels, those artists who rose up against the Bezalel school in Jerusalem, against images and phrases from the Bible, against European artistic styles of the Galut and the diaspora Jew, and against those winds of messianism stirred by the Zionist congresses. These artists, referred to as the Eretz Yisrael artists, who now make Tel Aviv their bastion, such as Rubin, Gutman, and Paldi, will replace the exotic Orientalism of Bezalel for a merry naivety a la Henry Rousseau of sun-scorched landscapes, picturesque Arab figures, and their donkeys. These artists saw the local Arab as a model of strength, as the model for the new Jew, the new Hebrew, and the metaphor for the pioneering heroism of the fledgling Jewish community in Palestine, the antithesis of the helpless, weak Galut Jew. Unlike Chagall's Luftmensch, where they're sort of floating around, Gutman's Gotthard has his feet, there's the solid feet on the ground, but his head is positioned stark against the sky between the rising sun and the waning moon, as if he is the third luminary. He is depicted as one with the gods, as represented in Egyptian and Babylonian reliefs, as you'll see above. From Amarna is a relief of, that was found, it dates from around 1300 BCE. It's of the pharaoh Amenhotep III, who's alongside the sun. The sun which was associated with the creator god, Re. The goatherd is his sharply defined profile is influenced by the Egyptian artistic style, which is referred to as the pharaonic position, where most of the body is in the profile, except for half for the chest. Notice also how the figure's almond-shaped eyes echo with those of the goats. And also notice how the curves on the bottom of the feet repeat in the horns of the goats, the waves of the sea, and the contours of the clouds. And this was an intentional idea, was to illustrate the harmony between the landscape and the people and the animals. This connection with the ancient Near East was important also to the sculptor Avraham Melnikov, known for his affinity to ancient Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Assyrian reliefs, especially from the reliefs uncovered in the palace of Sargon II and other monuments that he saw in the museums of Cairo and Damascus. Of particular interest for Melnikov was the lion motif, a symbol of courage and strength, for which he found inspiration also from a very rare Canaanite relief that was uncovered in Megiddo. That's on the left. Its most important realization is his lion monument, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, carved from the Galilee stone to commemorate the settlement of Tel Chai. That's on the right. And the bravery of its pioneers and their leader, Trumpeldor, who was killed in its defense in 1920. Similar to the Eretz Yisrael artists, Melnikov's neo-Mesopotamian style had a less of a connection with the biblical story, but they, yes, were put to the service of the Zionist cause, as they gave encouragement to the pioneers experiencing many back-breaking hardships and frustrations as they laid roads and built settlements under the blazing sun. In the 1940s, a new group emerges, made up of mostly Sabras, followers of Jabotinsky, who are not interested in pursuing a connection with the Galut Jew, nor with any of his Jewish baggage. They certainly were not interested in pursuing any further connection with the local Arabs, especially after the massacres of 1929 and their disappointment in the British white paper. Instead, this group tried to connect with the local Semitic pagan peoples and their myths, bypassing Judaism. And so when this movement, who saw themselves as the new Hebrew, referred to later as the Canaanites, when they saw Yitzchak Danziger's Nimrod in 1938, they saw it as the Hitgalmut, they saw it as the embodiment of all their ideas in one image. The sculpture became their icon, and he, Danziger, became their cultural hero. Danziger never actually belonged to the Canaanite movement. They did, however, what they had in common was their affinity to the land, to the place, and the fusion of land and man with its ancient Semitic past and its antiquities. Danziger was born in Berlin. After the family came on Aliyah, he went to study in England at the Slade Art School. He often frequented the British Museum and the Museum of Anthropology, where he developed an appreciation for the art of the ancient Near East, cultures of Sumer, Egypt, India, and Africa. He was also influenced by Malnikov, whom he had met in England. The sculpture Nimrod, the biblical anti-hero, that mighty hunter before the Lord, was associated with the building of the Tower of Babel, the ultimate act of defiance. Danziger admired Nimrod's rebelliousness, and he saw this sculpture as an attempt to fuse an ancient provocation with a modern one. This figure is truncated like an archaeological find, carved from the red Nubian sandstone that was imported from Petra. Its earthy colors and local connotations evoke the heroic past of an enigmatic desert culture of the Nubians. Nimrod is depicted as a fusion of man, animal, and falcon, typical of representations of Egyptian gods. The falcon, or the hawk, on his shoulder gives the impression of an Egyptian curl, known from depictions of Horus that you see on the left-hand side. He hides his bow, which becomes also his backbone. He is the hunter and the hunted. Naked and uncircumcised, he sets forth exuding a fierce energy, carrying his bow with sharpened eyes, wherein lies his security. With his attentive ears and his big protruding eyes, they seem to be scanning great distances. And the eyes, Danziger with influence. On the bottom you can see from prehistoric fertility images that were found in the area of the Kinneret of the Yarmoukhian culture. This work was commissioned by the Hebrew University to stand at the entrance of the archaeological park. But upon completion, there was a scandal. Professor Sukenik, who was then the head of the Department of Architecture, rejected it. He wanted a real archaeological find. And the religious community wasn't happy with it either. And so after a few years, the piece, it took a while, but eventually, a few years later, this piece was acclaimed as a major masterpiece of Israeli art. In 1958, Danziger sculpted a stone wall near the entrance of the Hebrew University, near the Givat Ram campus. I'm sure you might be familiar with this, on which he carved images that had recently, similar to those that had recently been uncovered in excavations in Israel. The two carved hands, its supplication to the moon deity. Notice this is the moon deity, the two phases of the moon. This was inspired from excavations that Yigal Yadin excavated at Chatzor for over 22 seasons. And you'll notice also we have here two scarabs. The winged scarab, or the scarab, is an Egyptian symbol of regeneration, resurrection, divinity, salvation. This image was part of a seal impression that was found on almost 1,000 handles of large storage jars that were excavated by Ushishkin in Jerusalem, in Lachish. And they date back to the rule of Hezekiah, king of Yehuda, who lived around 722 BCE. It seems that Hezekiah adopted and converted this Egyptian motif as his royal insignia, perhaps to symbolize divine salvation. Above the scarab, now this is a Givat Ram, and this is the actual stele that was found at Chatzor, that Yadin found, with the two hands. You see also on top the different phases of the moon, and this is just one of the seals that was excavated, that was found in, we call them the Lachish seals. This is a scarab, and on top in ancient Hebrew script it says Lamelech, to the king, and at the bottom in ancient Hebrew script is the name of one of 4 regional capitals, which were storage cities. These images from Chatzor and from Yehuda, from Judea, were inspired from very important and recently excavated sites in Israel during the 50s and the 60s. Unlike Danziger's earlier Nimrod, these images are definitely related to the Hebrew Israelite narrative. Moshe Kastel drew his inspiration from the ancient synagogues that were excavated in the Galilee, with their mosaics, inscriptions, and their relief images and decorations that were cut out from the local volcanic basalt stone. This led him to use a particular technique whereby he would ground up the basalt stone and adhere layers of it to the canvas. From the ground stone, he would then mold shapes that imitated ancient Hebrew script. or other images derived from ancient local cultures. On the right is some architectural motifs from the synagogue in Chorazim in the Galil. And in the bottom is the Gezer calendar, one of the earliest Hebrew inscriptions. And you see how it influenced Castell's work. Israeli art will eventually take on different agendas, different directions. Some artists will identify more with Western culture, others with abstract, international styles, and yet others to the West, to their own personal experiences. They seem to have lost interest in archaeology and its implications. Although in the 80s there will once again be a dialogue between Israeli art and the East, this time with a different twist, that of a particularly political nature, making a statement regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. David Reeb is one of these political artists with a political agenda. In his work, Green Lines, oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Okay, let's go, let's see, let's go to a different one. Green Lines with Green Eyes, 1987, Reeb juxtaposes violent images upon a tranquil hotel strip along the seaside. I'd like to point out the works of a contemporary artist, Micha Ullman. Let's go back to the level we had before. Yeah, Micha Ullman, who, having been educated in agricultural school, was greatly influenced by its philosophy that redeeming the land meant working the land in a very intimate way, feeling it in your hands, smelling it. In addition, he was also influenced by land art of the 70s. Ullman's works primarily with rusted iron plates and reddish chamra sand of his neighborhood in the Sharon, focusing on issues of place and makom and subterranean pits and memory and eternity. As exemplified in this large installation called Tsunami, where the everyday objects are just beginning to emerge from the ground, like an archaeological excavation, as a testimony to history, or washed ashore along the sands of time. According to Ullman, the shape of his structures in this work called Day-Night, on the corner on the left, Day-Night Havdalah, were inspired by the excavated ossuaries from the Chalcolithic period, up here, and the Hellenistic period at the bottom. Israeli art was often used as a tool to further nationalistic ideology. We saw it with the Salon artists, we saw it with the Eretz Yisrael artists, we saw it with the Canaanites. We will again see it in posters printed by printed by the government press office, by the labor unions, the JNF, the Keren Kayemet, in the socialist, realist style made popular during the Soviet regime, where all the figures are healthy and good-looking, muscular, and they're smiling, and they're eager, and they're satisfied to work with the land. Parallel to this, by the way, is the role of archaeology in reinforcing our national identity. Who can forget the dramatic finds of Masada, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Bar Kokhba letters? I'd like to conclude with a poignant interfacing of archaeology and Israeli art, where here too, the object was meant to promote the national cause. This bronze coin bears the oldest extant representation of the seven-branch candelabra. It was struck by the last Hasmonean king, Antigonus Matikyahu, in the year 37 before the Common Era, while he was fighting against Herod and the Romans. Professor Mishorer observes that this pruta has much less weight and is not consistent in terms of its mold with any other pruta that was struck by Antigonus Matikyahu. He suggests that this coin, with its depictions of the temple vessels, the menorah on one side and the temple of the showbread on the other side, with an ancient inscription in ancient Hebrew script that says Matikyahu Kohen Gadol, was issued primarily as a proclamation to the inhabitants of a besieged Jerusalem. In other words, it was propaganda, calling on them to make every possible sacrifice in defense of the temple, the very soul of the nation. Jerusalem will eventually fall to the Romans. Antigonus Matikyahu will be captured and executed, according to Josephus, he's decapitated. However, the seven-branched menorah will become the most important Jewish symbol and eventually will become the symbol of the state of Israel. Thank you.